Okay. So we'll make sure that... Testing. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Welcome to a convening of the Rules and Special Studies Committee on the Binghamton City Council, 5 p.m., Monday, August 30th, 2021. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, the clerk will call the roll.
So the committee members are just Scaringi, Strawn, and Friedman. So Councilman Strawn.
Present.
Councilwoman Friedman is absent. Hopefully she's on her way. And Chairman Scaringi.
Present.
And for the record, Councilman Burns and Councilwoman Riley are both here.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Councilwoman Friedman did communicate to me that she does get out of work at 5 p.m., so I know she should be on her way and confirmed her attending this evening. The purpose of this meeting is to begin a discussion concerning RL 21-168, which was lead sponsored by Councilwoman Friedman at the last Binghamton City Council work session in relation to an amendment to the Code of the City of Binghamton, Chapter 26, Article 4, Section 26.5, Rules and Procedure, Section 8, Order of Business to allow for public comment at special business meetings, as well as to additionally discuss further amendments in relation to this. Prior to this meeting, I reached out to the Office of Corporation Counsel. I'd like to thank them for the suggestions and notes that they had provided us. Also want to thank Councilwoman Riley and Councilman Burns for being here as well prior to our meeting that will start at 6 p.m. I would like to ensure that this committee meeting goes no longer than 10 of 6 so we can allow the city clerk's office and Corp Counsel office and staff to provide them enough time to get the IT information ready for the 6 p.m. City Council work session meeting. So at this particular time, this is really just a broad discussion at this point. The main stems that come off the trunk of the tree are, number one, the definition in the Binghamton City Charter in relation to special business meetings, how they are categorized, what they are defined as, and how the agenda is prepared and put forward prior to the public. More specifically, the potential addition of public comment to that and what that may look like. In a broader sense, it was also recommended by the Office of Corporation Counsel that we look more holistically at Article 4 and the respective sections that deal with not only the definitions of our respective meetings, whether it be a work session, a business meeting, or a special business meeting, how they are defined, and what the rules of public comment at any of those meetings might be, and how they might be codified into the Binghamton City Charter. Mr. Clerk, please note that Councilwoman Friedman is here. No, you're okay. So with that being said, I will first offer an opportunity for the other committee members of the Rules and Special Studies Committee to offer anything that they would like to regarding this discussion. I know Councilwoman Friedman, you just got here. I normally go ladies first, but would you like a minute to...
I can go second.
Councilman Strawn, if there's anything you'd like to add.
I apologize for
No, you're
being
fine.
late. I've waited for the elevator for the longest I have ever waited for that elevator.
You also work today. So.
So what you sent out earlier was just a suggestion of what the different meetings would look like. Is that right? So we're looking at all the types of meetings, not just a special meeting, but
Yes,
them,
that's
right?
correct. So again, just for clarification, the impetus for all of this was the RL that lead sponsor Councilwoman Friedman had brought down to the last work session concerning the addition of public comment at special business meetings. Corp Counsel correctly pointed out, per my request when I reached out to the office, that there are a number of sections that impact this in the city charter, specifically due to the fact that, number one, from the perspective of an agenda, we have to follow New York State open meetings law to ensure that at a minimum within 24 hours, our agenda is sent out to any appropriate media, such as the Press and Sun, our newspaper of record, as well as being posted as a draft to the City of Binghamton website to make sure that it's publicly available for our constituents and residents. The issue stems from the fact that there is not just one section that is applicable here, because of the fact that special business meetings are specifically defined within the city charter. So the goal of this discussion is going to ultimately hope to come to some consensus with the principles of what we would like to do, as well as paying attention to the important notes that the Office of Corporation Counsel provided us, and hopefully unanimously offer feedback to the entire body for the body to consider and ultimately amend the city charter.
the only broad question I had was, I mean, I'm definitely open to having public comment at special meetings, but is there any scenario where it says the special meeting is limited to the business that's the special meeting? Would there be any consideration to having the public comment also mirror that, where the public comment would be about the agenda item or items that were previously, would that be possible to at least discuss that? Because I mean, part of it to me is I think there should be, but let's say we have to come to do for fireworks, and then all of a sudden,
Right.
I think timeliness and respecting people's time is also part of a special meeting if we have to come separately. But I think that the subject matter that's on the agenda should be allowed to be commented on. That's kind of my broad. And then the other things, that I read looked good as far as decorum and, but I think to add that as a, because it's technically it says in here that we can't do that until we change this.
Right.
So I mean definitely be open to that. I think it's a good idea.
No, I agree with you, and those are all fair points, Councilman. Is when Councilwoman Friedman brought the RL down to the last work session, I had fairly immediately voiced, just speak for myself, vocalized my support for it. I think it's a good idea, but I do think it's a salient point that because special business meetings are not of the normal calendar, I guess, if you will, right? They can either be called by council president or a majority of the body, so they are out of the norm by definition. So due to that, there probably is some impact factor there with respect to ensuring that public comment is relevant to the topics being discussed, because it's not a regular business meeting, if you will. But I do think the incorporation of it is important. Councilwoman Freeman, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I also agree with that point. I think that's a good point, especially because, as you said, special business meetings are an extra time that we, have to come. And so being, respectful of people's time and keeping the comments to relevant, to the business at hand, I definitely agree with that. And again, I apologize for walking in a few minutes late, so I don't know if you mentioned this, but one of the reasons why I thought that this was a particularly important discussion to have and potentially change to make is that it seemed like we were having a lot of special business meetings regarding legislation. And I know that was something that was brought, concern, I guess, that was brought up was that there are lots of different kinds of special business meetings. For example, the State of the State address and the budget meetings and things like that. But it seems like there were almost every month. I mean, I don't know for sure, but it was like almost every month we were having a special business meeting regarding legislation that was presented at a work session on Monday, then expedited to be voted on Wednesday, 2 days afterward. And then once it was held over, we were scheduling a special business meeting. And so for constituents and members of the public, that's a quick turnaround. And that's, it's hard for anybody, but, for members of the council, but also for members of the public to, formulate their thoughts. And, it can come kind of as a surprise, a special business meeting. And so I felt like it was important, and I had heard feedback from constituents that they were frustrated that they didn't have a chance to voice their opinions on that legislation, given the fact that, the special business meeting was often, it was such a quick turnaround. So I definitely would agree that, keeping it to the business at hand would be, I think, a welcome addition. I did have one small concern with the language in the draft, and that was just that based on the decorum of certain people's comments, that could warrant the closing of the comment session. And the reason why that concerns me a little bit is that, and this has, again, happened to me before, where a constituent, during one of the times that public comment closed, before everybody had a chance to speak, they said, well, I can't control the people who come before me, so it's not, I have no control over, whether people are using profanity who are coming before me, and I didn't get a chance to address the council because of the behavior of others. So that was just the one thing that concerned me a little bit. I don't know. Sometimes there's like, oh, well, what's the word that I'm looking for? The group will be affected by your behavior is sometimes a deterrent to people, but in this situation, I don't know if that would. I worry that would not function as intended. So those were my thoughts.
Thank you, Councilwoman. If I may, for 10 seconds, just to kind of splice that down the middle, I kind of made a little sub-agenda for myself with respect to larger topical discussions. So I think all those points you just made are really good. If I can just slice off maybe the last part of what you discussed regarding that, because it's very important, but I'd like to carry it over into rules of public, because that's kind of part of it. So if we can just stick for a moment with the incorporation of public comment at special business meetings, with the rejoinder that the discussion must be salient to the topics being covered. I want to offer an opportunity to Councilwoman Riley as well as Councilman Burns, if either of you would like to speak to that, or if you have any input at all. Councilwoman Riley, please.
Thank you for this time. I would also like to highlight the fact that Corporate Counsel did make a note of all of the special meetings that would be impacted if we broadly highlighted special meetings and commentary. I think, this is just my opinion, that it should be, I agree with the discussion surrounding the public comment be limited to the business at hand, but I think it should only be where business is being conducted and voted upon. So if we are voting on any business matter, we add language to say such so that it is not expected to occur during, as Councilwoman Freeman mentioned the state of the city. So if we highlight that particular subset of meetings where business is conducted and voted upon, then that would help clarify when public comment would occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Riley. Yeah, I do think in the broadest sense, I think you make a good point there with respect to making sure that the variations of special business meeting that might exist, whether it be ones that we've had in the recent past, the State of the City address, budget meetings, and so on and so forth. You're absolutely right about that there needs to be delineation between those definitions. I think there's some flexibility with respect to when the agenda goes out for that specific type of meeting, then that obviously wouldn't be there. But I think holistically, I think your point is spot on, and I think you're right about that. So thank you for that. Councilman Burns, was there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to cutting off comment if somebody breaks decorum, I am all for decorum, and the language and the insults and things like that. I just have there's no place for them here. However, I've been watching my first city council meeting I was at. I was a teenager, but I've seriously watched them under the Crabb administration and under the Bucci administration, and trust me, there was some circus. There was a circus going on sometimes. I think Corporation Council was around for some of them. But what they generally did then, now we can't control these microphones the same way. I don't know when we go back into chambers, but as soon as somebody would break decorum, they would just cut off their microphone, and so that the people, it was being taped at home, it was being televised, and I think that's why a lot of them came in those days. But it would cut off their mic so that they couldn't be heard on television, and they would just be ignored until they got up and left, and then we would go to the next person. Theoretically, if I don't want Aviva to talk, I think she's going to say something really good, I'll just break decorum. You shut it down, and we never hear what Aviva had to say. So anyway, that's how I feel about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Strong.
I was just going to mention, if I read this literally, it looks like it would at least have to be a second person. If I read it literally, if violations continue by other persons. Now, I
Right.
don't want to say you want to have a number,
Right, yeah.
but theoretically, one person wouldn't. I mean, to me, then it would lead toward a pattern of this happening.
Right.
Now, I don't know if you put a number up. Once we get to 4, then that sounds crazy. You probably wouldn't do that, but
It's
you
not
know.
individual behavior or individualistic
if violations
situation,
continue,
but
with other
patterns of
persons,
behavior, yeah.
So, and I know they aren't always linked together. You wonder if one or two people say, "Hey, all right, everybody relax," so we
Right.
can keep this going.
Councilwoman, forgive me for 1 second. Ken, really quickly, just sticking to the original point, if I can ask, as it relates to just the discussion regarding special business meetings and the inclusion of public comment that is salient to what is on the agenda. In your opinion, is there anything outstanding that I or we have missed that we should discuss before moving on to rules and decorum? Right. Right. And that's pending legislation for that special business meeting. Okay. Really quickly, just to kind of take a straw poll, at least with the committee members, do we have consensus on that point and that point alone? So that's a discussion we can wrap up, at least that portion of our discussion. Councilman Strawn,
Yes.
Councilwoman
Aye.
Friedman? Okay. Aye, yeah, right, okay. If the clerk would please note officially for the minutes that we informally have unanimous consent concerning the addition of public comment at special business meetings that are not within the scope of a budgetary meeting, state of the city address, where pending legislation is being considered and voted on, and that the substance of that public comment should be salient only to the RLs being considered. So we have, and I don't want to speak for Councilwoman Riley or Councilman Burns, but they seemed positive, I think, on that point as well, and they've joined us. So just to get that in the record. So really quickly before we move forward, Councilwoman Riley, I'm sorry, you had your hand raised.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to check the language, because typically when we are drafting, when a code is written, it's supposed to be broad in nature, and rules then govern the order of a business meeting. The way it's written right now, if we were to need revision, we would have to go back and again amend the code. So is there a reason why it's not broad and then rules? I mean, I see the rules subsection, but the rules are still part of the overarching code. Do you get my point? It seems like we have to go through significant steps every time something is amended. And I know this is not that forum, but we received an email about a vote we made last year about salaries, remember? And now we have to go back and amend the entire code. So just a question. That was it.
Okay, I'm not 100% sure I understand, but section 26 is part of the code of the city of Binghamton. So if we're going to do something different,
I see
we
that.
need to amend it.
It's written here where it's listed. It was a question about procedures and how typically the code is set, and then there's a subset of rules that are used in terms of processes and governing bodies. That was my
Okay,
question.
so for example, New York State has the environmental law, right? The environmental law then leaves it to the DEC
Correct.
to create, but those rules and regulations are also adopted. They're not part of the legislation, but there's what's called enabling legislation,
Cool.
right? And those bodies then adopt the rules, but you are the legislative body.
But still, you're understanding there's two separate documents then, and one is more standard.
Well, that would be in
broad.
that case, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
how you
right.
decide to do it is,
Yeah,
Okay.
no,
but you'd still
Yeah.
have to vote, you'd still have to.
You get what I'm saying? 'Cause-
and so if I can just add on to that for 30 seconds, I think I kind of understand where Councilwoman Riley is coming from, right? So in the broadest general sense, when we talk about things like this, there's usually a constitution that has broad principled things, and then there's usually bylaws, which are an extending governing document that have more. Right, I understand that. Like, so for example, if you look at the Binghamton City Charter, there's actually a statement in there that codifies if there is something about the rules and procedures of our meeting that are not codified in the city charter, Robert's Rules of Order is what takes precedence. So while I totally understand that, and that makes sense, and there are a lot of organizations that run that way, I think the short of what Ken is trying to say is for our purposes, it's basically the city charter and that's it. And because from a procedural perspective, like you're asking, it's a good point that you're bringing up, I get it. So I think it's just more specifically, we don't have two governing documents, we have one. But I get it, I understand that. I appreciate that, thank you. Was there anything else in relation to what we already have come to agreement on? Okay. So that being said, moving forward, we can bring in a discussion concerning codifying in the city charter the rules in relation to public comment. And I will start off with Councilwoman Freeman, if there's anything you'd like to add.
I don't know if for the record, it would be helpful for me to just briefly repeat the point that I made before, and that was just concern with cutting off public comment if the rules are broken. And the concern that I raised before was I worry that other people will be negatively affected by previous behavior. And I base this concern off of something that happened during one of the public comment sessions that were ended prematurely, I guess. I had a constituent send me a message right after saying I was waiting in line to comment, and because others before me used profanity, I was not able to say my comment on the record.
No, I appreciate that, and thank you for that. And yes, you're it's a good point that you're making, because there's almost kind of a dynamic between the individual and collective, in that, right, decorum needs to be respected by everyone, which I think very broadly, I think we all have consensus with. But there is an impact factor that if those before you don't respect that decorum, does it potentially impede on future speakers? And that's a fair point, absolutely. Councilman Strong, was there anything you wanted to add regarding this discussion?
I guess my only thought would be then, how would you? I guess it's hard to be objective totally in those situations. Obviously, if the chairperson or the president or whoever's presiding over the meeting, technically they could end it or call for. Now this is saying we'd have to call for a vote. Right? I don't know if in the past we had a full vote. Maybe we did. But how would you not, in essence, deem the decorum irrelevant if you couldn't do that? I think it still has to be in the purview, but I don't know if you try to add any objectivity to it.
Yeah.
I know I was kind of kidding before, but just to make a point, all right, 3 strikes and you're,
Yeah.
I don't know, but if there's no scenario where you can shut it down, then the decorum becomes in essence a moot point potentially. So that would be my only. I mean, I would definitely be for, maybe expanding on the way it's written, so it's not a one and done. And you certainly it would have to become a pattern, but
Sure.
And the person has to be removed. I guess you can stop the meeting until that person's removed if it really got to that level. So I guess that would be my only. I think that somehow the chairperson or the president or whoever should still have some ability to do that in a scenario that would require it. But I agree that you shouldn't be too quick to do that. But I don't know how you would put that into writing if you're really going to do it, other than just leave it to the discretion of that person.
No, I think those are all good points as well, and I think the purpose of calling this meeting is to attempt to find some middle ground, and I think it's also worth noting, just to formally get on the record between us, those who may be watching at home, right? The historical factor here is we have for a number of years as a body conducted public comment in a manner that procedurally has very specific steps. My name is Jane Doe. I live at 123 Main Street, or I do not reside in the city, but I work in the city, and I work at employer X, or I do not reside or work in the city, and then one of us has to make a motion to suspend the rules to allow that. So just in a broader context, I think it's important to understand that the reason why we are entertaining to move this forward is because, quite frankly, that process has not been codified in the city charter, and it needs to. So that takes into account, I think, what you were both saying regarding making sure that there's fairness for everyone, and at the same time making sure that there is some enforcement mechanism to ensure that a decorum is maintained. Councilwoman Friedman, I'm sorry.
I was wondering if I could respond.
Sure, go ahead.
What I thought was kind of nice was that there's, in the draft amendment, there is an individual, I don't know exactly where it is, but I think it said if an individual uses profanity or, is otherwise breaks decorum, they would be removed, which I think could account for the fact that, I appreciate what you're saying, Councilman Strawn, is that, okay, well, if you don't, what is the point of decorum if there's no way to enforce it? And I think, we could say, well, if an individual uses profanity, maybe FCC word, prohibited words or whatever, whatever we want to say, that individual could be removed, but maybe it wouldn't negatively impact those who have not yet spoken.
Sure.
I offer that for consideration.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Councilwoman Riley, Councilman Burns, anything either of you would like to add? Thank you. Councilwoman? I can circle back if it's easier. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. No, of course. Office of Corp Counsel, Ken, if I may, is there anything with specificity with regard to this range of the discussion that maybe we missed or we should take under consideration?
No, on that particular point, just going back to the first thing, remember, this is a privilege, not a right. Right? There is no such thing as public comment in open meetings law. It's something that you allow the public to come in and do because you've made that determination. And just kind of what Councilman Strawn was saying, eventually it has to have some teeth. Right? I drafted it that way on purpose. It's not the first person. Right? In fact, the first person gets a warning. Right? It's only after they continue that behavior that you stop that. And then it goes on to, if other people continue this behavior, then it would go to a vote to, terminate public comment for that evening. Could it be unfair to somebody who wanted to speak and intended on, speaking respectfully? Yes. But unfortunately, I think it has to have some teeth. So I drafted it that way with the expectation that people would respect it. They wouldn't want to cut off other people's right to speak. I think if it's something that starts happening routinely, then it certainly needs to be revisited. But I drafted it this way because I think that it needs to have some enforcement capacity and that hopefully people will respect it. They will appreciate the fact that council provides for this public comment and that it won't be an issue. Right? But that's what you all get to vote for.
Ken, if I can ask really quickly to kind of bring together some of the things that Councilwoman Friedman and Councilman Strawn were talking about, are you of the opinion that the current language, the way it's written, allows for the flexibility of enforcement with respect to both an individual versus the collective group?
Yeah, I tried to do that in the drafting because it's very clear there's a long list of what happens when one person does something.
Right.
Right, and then what the consequences that are. And then there's a short paragraph that says, if this behavior continues by other people,
Right.
then this becomes your option.
Got it. Okay.
Right? And I think that that's something that whether it's the presiding officer or somebody else, and I tried to make sure that other people could participate in this, is to say, everybody, please remember, if you can't respect the rules, then we're going to have to stop public comment. It's not fair to everybody else, so please do so. And I think that would be the way you'd want to handle it initially. And again, if it turns out that this becomes every meeting issue, we'll revisit it. But if every meeting you're having people doing this on a constant basis, you have another issue.
Right.
So.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Ken. I appreciate that. To follow up with that, I'll put this both out there to Councilwoman Friedman and Councilman Strawn with Corp Counsel's response concerning your good point about the individual and collective. Are you satisfied with the way that it's written, that flexibility is there for the collective, but also to your good point regarding an individual and not impeding on someone else who may want to speak? They just haven't had the chance to speak yet because the first 4 people just happened to stand up before they did, and they should have a right to speak as well.
I'm rolling it around in my head a little bit
No.
because
If you'd like,
Yeah,
I can go to Councilman Burns and
Can
come back.
can I
if you
jump
like.
in just one other thing? Remember, even with the next person, they also need to get a warning.
Right.
So it's not something that's just going to happen is, one person's been cut off, they've been removed, the next person comes in, says one thing inappropriate, you don't automatically stop the meeting.
Correct.
Again, there's another warning.
Right.
right?
Okay.
So I just wanted, I didn't say that before, I wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah,
No,
no, I appreciate that because I think one of the, one of the things I think that was so frustrating during that situation that public comment was cut off was that there was no warning and it kind of just happened abruptly. So yeah, you can come back. I'm considering, I'm thinking about it.
Councilman Birds?
Yeah, I was just thinking that if there was somebody in the if there was somebody that wanted to speak, and I knew that they were an expert on the subject that we're on, and it was about to be shut down, I'm wondering if you'd be able to, before we do that, there's one person I'd like to hear, or on those nights, I know everybody gets in line, could we have people signed up ahead of time, say this is the order, so that I know that my person would get to speak, and whoever had somebody to speak, and then after they signed up online or something, and then it goes to first come first serve after that. I don't know, something like that.
So, thank you, Councilman. So if I can counteract just so I can get some clarity. So you use the language, an individual who may have an expertise in something, right? That essentially could guide the body on the discussion of topic X, right? While that person would obviously be free to speak during public comment, I would tend to think, and Corp Counsel can follow up on this in any way, but if it's someone who is objectively in their field considered someone with expertise, they would probably be someone, particularly at a work session, that would be itemized in an agenda item. No, I'm not saying not necessarily. I didn't say it was an absolute. What I am saying is that I've been on council for 5.5 years, and I have never once seen council wait for someone to speak with the pre-knowledge that their contribution in public comment was necessary for the purpose of their expertise in their field. I would argue we would probably want to give that person the opportunity to actually speak with us when that respective RL is being considered. So again, it's not an absolute, but and again, in a broader sense, I'm not even sure if that's the purpose of public comment. So I think it's an excellent point that you're making. I just don't know if it's germane to public comment.
Well, what if at the special meeting we determined that we had a couple of speakers before the public comment, or the public comment's over, now we're going to move on to these other special speakers or something like that, but I don't know.
Councilman Burns, just like you can't determine public comment based on proposed content. Right, just because somebody's going to say something that you might think is important doesn't give them a special right to public comment over anybody else. I think the more likely scenario, and just again going to your issue before, is that under these circumstances, the group is getting at least 3 warnings, because one person's gotten 2 warnings, they've been cut off, they've been asked to remove. Another person's gotten at least 1 more warning before, so there are multiple warnings. The other part of it is that 90% of the time, this is going to be first read legislation. Right? So if it happens, if you're in a public meeting and suddenly, you have to cut off that meeting, those people who didn't get a chance to speak are going to, you can hold it over because people didn't get a chance to speak. They're going to get a chance the next time, and if it's somebody who might have some expertise or somebody you want to make sure gets in what they had to say, they can write a letter. That doesn't include obscenities and profanity and everything else, to make sure that that information becomes available. So I think it's going to be a very, very rare situation where it's going to be second read legislation, because people already had an opportunity to comment on it before. They're going to know the meeting got cut off. They're going to be able to write comments in. So it's going to be very, very unusual that somebody's not going to get to comment on pending legislation.
Right.
Because if it gets cut off, you can hold the legislation over so that people will get to comment.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Councilman, but I would also add to that, piggybacking off of what Ken just said, right? So if you know that there is someone in the audience that has an expertise in thing X or related to RLY, right? You had pre-knowledge of that. How do we know that? Well, because by definition, you knew the person was sitting there, right? So maybe a good way to find a balance between that council member could ask council president, when this RL is being reviewed at work session Z, I would like to formally request that this expert be given the opportunity to speak to this body because they have an expertise in thing X that's being considered in RLY. So we can actually give that person and their skill set the respect that it deserves. But again, in a broad sense, I think your point is very well taken. Councilwoman Freeman.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask a clarifying question to Ken, what you said. You're saying that it would be rare that at a special business meeting we would see first read legislation? Is that what you were saying?
No, just in general, that anytime you have first read legislation now, you're going to have public comment.
Right, because
Right.
it presumably would be at a regular.
Whether it's a regular meeting or a special business meeting, you're going to have public comment on that legislation.
Right, okay.
If as a result of the conduct of a few people, the public hearing is closed, you as a body have the opportunity to hold that legislation over so it will be second read, so people who didn't get a chance to speak the first time can either come back and hopefully speak when it's second read legislation at a regular or special business meeting, or if they don't want to take the chance that people are going to do it again, they can write something that will be part of the meeting and that you'll all get the information.
Okay, so in other words, just to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying, in other words, it would be rare to have a situation where the legislation couldn't be held over in order to facilitate
Any-
multiple public comment
No,
sessions?
Any first read
it's a good point you're making, and just so Cliff Note version, yes, you're 100% correct, because we already have it written in our city charter that you don't need a vote, you don't need a majority vote, you only need a motion and a second, and you also don't need to, as a member of the body, stipulate a reason why you're requesting the holdover. So if there's 10 people that want to speak about RLX and only 7 of them got to because decorum went out of hand, you could make a motion to say, and if you wanted to add the reason, you could, I would like to hold this over for the purpose of allowing it to be second read legislation. That's what Ken was talking about with respect to first read legislation the first time around. And then at the next voting meeting, those 3 people who did not get the chance to speak could either come back to that next meeting or submit something officially in writing to the city clerk's office by email or by mail, and they would be afforded that opportunity to do so.
Okay, I see. So that situation would assume that we agree on both points that we're discussing. First of all, the decorum issue, and also adding public comment to special business meetings.
Yeah, I think you've already made that decision. You're going to add public comment to all special business,
Okay.
business meetings at which a legislation is being voted upon.
That was,
Okay, right.
and that's a good point, and that was the reason earlier why I asked with respect to that nugget of
Okay.
it was, and that's why we have unanimous consent on that. So that's a good point.
Right, okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in on one thing?
Sure.
I just don't want it to get lost somewhere because Councilman Scringi, I wasn't sure what you were saying before, but in terms, again, the expert and things like this, we cannot allow people in public comment, and I'm doing public comment here, not public hearing.
Right.
Just stay with public comment, based on the content of what they're going to say. Because this person may know something that somebody else doesn't, and we think they should have an opportunity to say
Right.
it. You cannot do that, right? You're back to what we just discussed. They're going to have an opportunity to put something in writing, maybe speak at the next one. They're not going to lose that chance, but you can't vote at that meeting and saying, well, we really want to hear from Gio because Gio knows these things. We're going to let him speak instead of others.
Right.
You cannot do that.
That would negate the fair and equity clause in the New York State Open Meetings Law, which I'm pretty sure is the only meaty thing in that in relation to public comment. Yeah, I was trying to say exactly that, but if someone is an expert, like, for example, if we have a budget issue, Chuck is our city comptroller. He has expertise in that and so on and so forth. So not
It's
during.
different, but Chuck wouldn't be talking during public comment.
Correct, yeah. No,
Right, you during your deliberations could say, we
Correct.
want to talk to, Mr. Shager because we have a question.
Correct. And
That's a completely different issue.
completely separate thing. And I was trying to isolate those two things. You're absolutely right about that.
But you couldn't say during your deliberations, well,
Right.
now we want to hear from, Ms. Smith.
Right.
Because Ms. Smith, we think, knows a lot about the budget.
Right.
Right? You could hear from Mr. Shager, who's the city comptroller, but not somebody who, wasn't part of the process.
Right.
Because you think they may have more information. They would be speaking at public comment, or of course could speak to all of you individually, and then you represent their concerns or their ideas.
Absolutely. Councilman Strawn. Thank you,
I
Ken.
was just going to say three quick points. One is this here would have, if it was followed the way it's written, would have extended the other two times that because this has happened twice when we were on Zoom.
Right.
And then the last time where some of this could have been invoked, it didn't. And I was going to say the second point was, as a practical matter, it is much more difficult just practically to do it when you're not on Zoom.
Right.
So, I mean, that last time, and of course the one meeting when we didn't have public comment, that's why we're here too. We've already decided that.
Exactly.
The last thing I was going to say is maybe we should have some kind of a prescriptive warning, like a prescriptive statement, so it's less subjective, where there could be no doubt. Like I know Sophia reads, like at the beginning, maybe if this is invoked, the first one, maybe there should be a prescriptive warning statement that, I know people aren't on the same team, but it's not just like she just feels like doing it, like where you listen, and it's written a paragraph, if it delineates, not just a general warning, hey, stop, or we're going to do whatever.
Councilman, I
So there's-
apologize, I'm cutting it. Yes, I
that
would
make
do
sense what I'm
exactly
saying?
that.
A script.
I
so to
would,
speak,
yes, I would create
there's no
here's the
doubt
list
what
of
they're
things so
saying.
that when, councilperson X says, point of order.
Right.
The speaker is using profanity and under this, and you'd have the sections in front of you.
Right.
And then I would have something for the presiding officer to read every time. You have been given a warning, this is the next, it would be scripted every time so that people aren't getting different responses.
Nothing questioned.
So I
Absolutely.
know that people might not know each other, but it would be very clear that a second or third person is the reason why somebody else,
Right.
I'm not trying to cast blame, but they've had plenty of opportunities to say, okay, and the last meeting was better than the previous one. I mean, if you're just looking at how people are,
And
getting that
it makes
we're
it more
making
objective and less
right.
subjective. Absolutely. Councilwoman Riley, you had asked me to come back to you in a little bit if you wanted me to.
Just in terms of logistics.
Go ahead.
This is your committee meeting, and you will be presenting this in a formal process at our next work session?
If there's consensus, yes.
Oh, from the.
Yeah, right.
And then when you present it, can we have it with the tracked changes as a piece?
Oh,
within?
1,000%.
Okay.
Because that's an excellent point that you're making, because this would actually, the way our city charter is written, because this body is considering a change or amending our actual governing document,
Exactly.
right? Our city
Exactly.
charter. Absolutely. So there would actually be a final RL, if you will, that will
With the
be
track
considered,
changes.
right? Which, technically speaking, could also fall under all of the normal things, right? There could be a motion made to amend
the
something
language.
or something like that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And the reason I ask that is there's a pretty significant portion on walking people out of the meeting, which I have not taken the time to determine if that is significantly mentioned in other areas of the charter.
Okay.
And so I would like to have that extra time to do so, because it
Sure.
may not be necessary to go in that much depth about escorting people out with the security or police, just different things that are here right now. So when it comes to us, I will know my timeline and what we have as a body in terms of the amendment process.
So, no, thank you for that, Councilwoman Riley. I think those are all good points. As chair of this committee, here is what I will suggest to my fellow committee members, If we do have consensus today, which we'll look at in a moment, I would suggest that if we have unanimous consensus with what we have in front of us and the good discussions that we had today, Corp Counsel will obviously write all of that up. We would receive that RL, and in addition to your really good point, I think that it should be the suggestion of this committee that the RL associated with these changes not be expedited when introduced, so that gives us an additional 2 weeks in case.
Absolutely.
Um,
Thank you.
if everybody is, if that makes sense. So thank you for that. So with that being said, right nose on the button. So at this time, and again, this is procedural for the Rules and Special Studies Committee, so this is only applicable to the appointed members of the committee, Councilwoman Friedman, Councilman Strawn, and myself. The chair will entertain a motion at this time to pass forward to the broader body a unanimous consent for what we have in front of us with respect to the incorporation of public comment at special business meetings that are salient to the discussion points at hand, as well as the codification of rules for public comment, with the proviso that when the RL comes down, it not be requested to be expedited. So there is an additional, so we get that full amount of time.
The RL is coming from you.
Right, exactly, yeah. No, yeah,
There's
you're right.
nobody to
It is.
request to
It is
expedite it
te-
except
yeah.
for you.
So you're right. It is technically coming from me because I'm the chair of this committee. So I will put on record right now that I will not request that it be expedited to satisfy that genuine concern. So I appreciate that. So at this time, I'll entertain that motion.
Motion.
So motion by Councilman Strawn, seconded by Councilwoman Friedman. All those in
Yeah, I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those against, please signify by saying nay. Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for the judicious discussion. This was really good. We got through this. I want to thank Councilwoman Friedman, Councilman Strawn. I also want to thank Councilwoman Riley and Councilman Burns for attending and for their input. I want to thank the city clerk staff for clerking this, for all the extra work of getting this done before, as well as the Office of Corporation Counsel for providing us with this information. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved by Councilwoman Friedman, seconded by Councilwoman Strawn. This meeting